Welcome back. You're now doing less with John and Jeff. We are the Bad News Bears, and this is the biggest drop in the stock market that we've seen in a long time. So you know we're going to be talking about it. The market is down around a little over 10% this past week, and all sorts of blame is being thrown. Some people think it's the coronavirus. I don't know. What do you think it is, John?
I think it was because I did a round of cardio this morning on the on the treadmill, so I think the markets didn't like that very much.
Yeah, I wouldn't like that much either. Don't do cardio, just lift. You're losing all your gains.
Yeah, if you haven't looked at your 401k statement, let me just say, don't look at it.
Do yourself a favor and never open it. Yeah. Just let it sit there.
Keep your happiness. Unless you've been listening to Do Less podcast and you've become extremely bearish on the S&P 500 and you've divested from any exposure to overpriced stocks in the U.S., then good for you. You probably lost less money.
If you're like me, you're going to feel like a bit of an asshole during these times because these are the times when I am up. And so I walk around happy when the market's down. I'm like, ooh, feels good this week. And everyone else is pissed. And they hate me even more because I'm just running around having a good time and everyone else is angry.
So all the anger that you have towards that stems from your losses in your 401k, just channel that towards Jeff.
That's right.
He can take it.
Because it's my fault you lost money.
You can make a what are the dolls called that you make? Effigy?
Oh, voodoo doll?
Oh.
Effigy, yeah.
Both of them, yeah. Make a voodoo doll of Jeff and have him...
Please let your hatred flow towards me.
Have him holding a little cell phone and turn it red. That will make your 401k go up.
That's true. That's how that works.
So what are the causes, though, is what you asked me. Coronavirus is the big one that is attributed to this stock market sell-off. There's going to be a massive slowdown in growth, slowdown in earnings for all companies worldwide, basically, because everyone's not going to work, everyone's staying home, avoiding contact with other humans.
The big question, though, I have is coronavirus good for Corona Seltzer or bad for Corona Seltzer?
That is a good question. And I was just viewing a Corona Seltzer ad on my Twitter feed, which I believe is attributed to my phone is listening to me. And it hears me saying corona. It says coronavirus, but all I hear is this corona. And then it's like, this guy must be interested in corona, so he's going to be interested in this ad.
Pleasantly surprised by this ad.
Seltzer. Yeah. But I think the coronavirus is definitely a trigger. It might be the pin, so to speak, that bursts a stock market bubble. We've been talking about a stock market bubble since before this podcast started. We were very clear that we believe that stocks are overpriced, because just earnings have not shown at all in the past, call it 10 years. Really, the last 2 or 3 years, earnings have not kept pace with the stock market growth. So I think that something like the coronavirus would definitely prick that valuation bubble where prices are so high. And so I can definitely say with confidence that the stock market is lower right now. We're recording this Thursday after the market closed on February 27th. I can confidently say the market is lower than it would otherwise have been without the coronavirus. But I will say also that I don't think it's the only reason. I think that there's other factors like a Bernie Sanders election of Bernie Sanders' presidency possibility has been steadily increasing over the past couple Democratic debates and Democratic primaries, and I think a Bernie Sanders presidency will be absolutely abhorrent to stock prices. So if you're gonna start pricing those in, you're gonna have to start doing it sooner than later, because his odds of winning the presidency is what it's like. Well, he's like 67% chance of winning the Democratic nomination, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's almost certainly going to win the nomination. I don't know who's going to take it from him.
Mm-hmm. The Democratic National Convention.
Yeah, they can try. I think it's low probability he wins the general election, but I thought the same thing about Trump, and Trump won anyway. So it's not impossible, especially if this coronavirus leads to a recession in the U.S., then even though obviously that is not Trump's fault, people still blame shit like that on the president anyway. So,
well, who can blame them when your president is literally telling you every day that the stock market is up?
Right.
This is because of me.
If he keeps taking credit for all the gains, then he's going to get all the blame too. Exactly. So it's just like he brought it upon himself.
Right.
But people get blamed. Like, I don't know. The president gets way too much credit or blame for either the economy or the stock market. Like they have some effect on it, but not like just like they don't own it.
Right.
Like it doesn't belong to them.
Yeah, definitely. What I would say to what you mentioned, yeah, definitely that if the stock market goes down, then Bernie Sanders is more likely to become elected in the presidential race. And as I was saying, if Bernie Sanders' chance of becoming elected is going higher, which is causing the stock market to go down, and the stock market,
like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. The stock market going down causes him a higher chance of being elected. It's like a positive feedback loop. He's just gonna gain speed and gain more momentum.
Yeah, and if you're wondering why Bernie Sanders' election would be so bad for the stock market, it's because obviously he needs Congress to do some things, but the number of national powers or powers for national emergency that the president has through executive orders has grown tremendously since, I think, Bill Clinton is probably when it started. Maybe George Bush, I'm not sure. But like around that era, like the 2000s era, going into Obama, there's just been a steady trend upward in the number of executive orders used to like get things done rather than going through Congress. And so like if Bernie Sanders can like somehow get like executive orders through for like rent control or, just like things that are just uneconomic, it could be pretty disastrous for a lot of firms. And so, there's no telling what he will actually get done. But like if he got everything he wanted to get done, like I'm not being hyperbolic when I say if he had his way, it would destroy our economy. That's not being hyperbolic. Right. That's being like scientific, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, you could just look at the Green New Deal. There's just,
I mean, he didn't write that, but I think he supports it. But it's not even a bill. It's just a list of desires. It's a list of hopes written on a piece of paper. It's like there's no plan to do any of it.
I'm just referring to what you were saying, the executive order. You could just like one day say, executive order, all fossil fuels must stop being burned. And it's just like, okay, well,
right, and that would literally
collapse
collapse
industry that depend on that
economy. And it's not even like that industry; it has a ripple effect, right? If we can't get fossil fuels, we can't power our homes, we can't transport our food, we can't drive our cars. It's like literally everything you could attribute to your standard of living will not be there, or it will be insanely expensive to the point where you have to pick and choose. Like you'll have to choose between a hot shower and like a warm meal. It's like when's the last time anyone had to do that, you know? This is because cheap fossil fuels exist. And I know people don't like them because they cause global warming. I understand that's bad. But everything we like about our lives, we owe to cheap fossil fuels. Right. That is how we support them. So it's like until we're ready to sacrifice these things, you know, they're here to stay. And that's just the reality.
Yeah, even like even electric powered cars, electric powered, you know, that's the trend. That's they're powered by
they're powered by fossil fuels.
They're charged from an outlet, which gets power off the grid, which was generated by a coal power plant in a lot of cases.
Yeah, we're still like using 20% of our energy comes from coal. So even if all of our cars go to electric, guess where that electricity is coming from?
Right.
Coal. So it doesn't do anything if the car is electric. You have to change where the energy comes from.
Yeah, this may or may not be along that line, but it's an interesting point that I read recently, and it was saying if you drive an electric car, a new electric car, if you buy a new electric car, you are actually worse for the environment, worse for the CO2 emissions than if you were to repurpose an old Hummer. Not even repurpose, just like refurbish an old Hummer. If you were to get that
right,
if you could get an old Hummer driving and drive that around, you're actually contributing less fossil fuel, less emissions than a new electric vehicle. So,
right, because here's what a lot of people don't think about. Not only does the car burn fossil fuels while it drives, when you build it, you burn a bunch of fossil fuels. And it's like, this is the fossil fuels no one ever thinks about. It's like, what are the fossil fuels it took to get that thing?
And then you put it on, and then you build it and you put it on a cargo ship, or you put it on like a cross country truck that's gonna.
It's like you gotta mine the metals. Okay, that equipment takes fossil fuels. All the equipment that mines the metals runs on fossil fuels. The equipment that makes the polymers those factories burn fossil fuels. So like extracting all the resources, combining them, you know, paying the salaries of all the people who engineer it and make sure the plants go. They drive their cars to work. They eat food, which gets put on cars and on trucks driven by fossil fuels. Every step of the way is powered by fossil fuels.
They eat cows, which fart and contribute.
It's just like you cannot escape these things. They're everywhere. It's like this. They're how we achieve, and it's obvious, right? So like before coal was discovered, pre-industrial revolution, there were literally thousands of years of human history where zero progress was made. Okay, this is not a coincidence. Like we didn't just happen to pull ourselves out of poverty the same time coal was discovered could be used to power factories. That wasn't a coincidence. They happened together for a reason. Right. The things we can accomplish depend on the level of energy we can tap into. And so essentially what fossil fuels really are is like stored solar energy, right? So the sun emits light from fusion reactions in its core, and then that light reaches the earth, and then plants turn that into food, right? They convert carbon dioxide and light into like mass for the plant, right? And then if that plant dies and gets buried underground, it decomposes into hydrocarbons, otherwise known as coal, oil, natural gas. So this is all the solar energy it's like, think of fossil fuels as like solar panels that were storing the energy over millions of years, actually. Millions of years of solar energy has been stored in the ground in the form of oil and coal. And now we're taking advantage of that. We're burning it and getting that energy back out. And so it's like, it's hard to compete with that. Yeah, you can make a solar panel, but the level of coverage of solar panels we can have compared to the number of trees and grass and stuff over millions of years, like you start to see how one is much more abundant than the other. Like, it's just really not on the same level.
Yeah, the one you have to mobilize and you have to set it up and build it and equip it on your house or on whatever you're trying to. The other one, you just light a match and you got you release the energy.
Like you just pull it out of the ground and you just burn it.
Yeah,
like it's a little more complicated than that, but not really.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, so bringing that up was relevant to what we were saying, because if there was some sweeping legislation that was just like, no more of this, only that.
Right.
It's like, well, how much did you take into account?
Right.
This versus that, and how much of that there was incorporated into this? If that makes sense. Like it's kind of a blind.
It's just like we haven't planned for it. It represents a massive amount of uncertainty.
Yeah, it'll send us back into, like you said, the 1,000 years of no growth.
Yeah, again, I'm not being hyperbolic. If we banned fossil fuels, it wouldn't be as bad as the Middle Ages because we still have things like nuclear and solar and other things. So, it'd be like if you averaged the Industrial Revolution era with the Middle Ages. That's about what our standard of living would look like, is if you took the halfway point between those two. So it's like, this is not...
Do you actually...
You can't just...
Do you have a reference of what the S&P 500 was between those two periods? I think it might be...
but it was a lot lower.
I think it might be 10%...
10?
In 5 days decline a couple times over. A couple more of those.
Couple more of those. Yeah, but I mean, he's never going to accomplish anything like that because people just won't stand for it. Once people start to feel their standard of living fall, like they're not going to go along with it anymore. It's like ideas are okay until you feel the cost of them, right? It's like, an idea can be popular until you actually notice what it costs.
Yeah, but that's the whole issue with lending power to someone with the hope that in the future, if I don't like it, I can just, I'll change my mind. I don't like it. But if you lend that power, sometimes it's not salvageable. Sometimes they will be able to seize what they were.
I think you got to have like a lot of support to keep like a kind of dictator type thing going. Like you have to have like loyalty, I think. And he actually, I guess he does have like a core, a very decent core following that's very loyal to him. But I don't know. I think he would cause a lot of damage. Honestly, I don't see any benefits to anything. Maybe he would do less foreign intervention. I could get on board with that. But I think he would just cause a lot of damage for no reason. Mm-hmm. I mean, it would be in his point to reduce wealth inequality, and I think he would actually succeed at that.
Right.
But like that's not a goal worth pursuing. That's what people got to realize, is that inequality is irrelevant, right? It's what matters is, what is the standard of living?
Yeah.
Of most people, and is it going up? Is it increasing? Are you able to increase your standard of living if you want to?
So
that's what matters.
So if the richest person maintains 1% of their wealth and the poorest person maintains 50% of their wealth, that inequality went down a lot, but everybody's so much worse.
Right. And so it's like, or another way you can look at it is like, if all the billionaire, like let's say he just took the money from all the richest people, you could probably run the government for like a year.
Not even, yeah.
And then like, now there's no more rich people. Not no more, but like there's fewer. So the wealth inequality has gone down significantly. But, 2 years later, that redistribution is going to have no effect. Like it's a one-time deal.
Yeah, I don't even think you could run it for a year if I think about it. I think we've actually talked about this on a previous episode, but I think if you summed all of them net wealth, which is not even, if you want to talk about purchasing power, it's not even like cash on hand for these people. It's like you nationalize their ownership of all their assets, which is companies, which is resources. If you nationalize that, if you absorb that into the government, you might absorb probably over $1 trillion, but definitely not over like 2 trillion. And the government spends 4 trillion a year. So it's like, you would be able to run it for like 6 months.
Right. And we talk a lot about like big numbers. And so one thing I've never said on this podcast before, but I often do to help me visualize these numbers, because I think it makes it easier, is if you were to take like 1 million, for example, and just say, look at that in terms of seconds, right? So 1 million seconds is 12 days, roughly. Okay? So you can think about 1 million as 12 days.
So if you were to count one number per
right.
second, 1, 2,
right.
3,
2, it would take 12 days to get to 1 million, right?
So pretty big number.
So pretty big. Now to get to 1 billion, drumroll, it would take 32 years. Okay, so that's how big of a difference there is between 1 million and 1 billion. It takes 12 days to count 1 million seconds versus 32 years to count 1 billion seconds. Okay, now 1 trillion, that's 3,200 years. Or sorry, no, 32,000 years.
32,000 years.
32,000 years. Okay? So that should hopefully give some scope into what we're talking about. So when that's at that point, that you're starting to push the bounds of what we can comprehend, right? Nope. No one can understand 32,000 years. Like that's
like even that's
like,
a number that you
know,
can't even comprehend.
Right. So it's like it's already getting too big. But fortunately, trillion is sort of the biggest realm we deal in with numbers and economics. But like my point being is when Bernie Sanders throws out a number like his plan would increase the budget by $30 trillion, okay? That's like someone saying to you like, I'm going to put you in prison for 90,000 years or 900,000 years, like it's just like this is an outrageously large number and we do not have the money for it. It's okay. We don't even have the money for what we currently do. We're on a steady path to bankruptcy. Any propositions to increase our spending is incredibly irresponsible. And anyone who tells you we can afford it is lying to you. It's just not true. And people say, oh, we can tax the rich more. Like we said, there's not enough money in that group of people.
Not even the right order of magnitude.
It's not even close. If you took all their money and all their wealth and all their income and made them slaves to the government, even if you did all that, you could not fund his plans.
Yeah.
So it's just not feasible. It's just not. So it's like, if that's what he aspires to achieve, even if he gets 10% of that, it's still going to be a bad thing.
So thus the stock market going down.
Yeah, so thus I make money. I'm going to vote for Bernie Sanders, actually.
Oh, I guess.
No, I'm kidding. I don't do that. I don't actually root for the market to go down. I know it makes me money and there's some cognitive dissonance happening there when it's like, ooh, I make money. but I I don't want to be short. I want to be rooting for the economy, but or for the stock market, but I can't because it's just, in my opinion, so overpriced. Like it's just I can't in good conscience buy into something that's so overvalued. So it's like I don't know. I'm not like rooting for it. It's just like I'm not gonna go down with it either.
Yeah. Similarly, my positions are very much not correlated with the increase of what a lot of people benefit from. So it's like,
Right.
specifically, a lot of people, when I say a lot of people, I mean people in the US. So it's like, oh, you're just betting against the US. You're investing in foreign currencies or you're investing in gold. That's you're betting against your family, your friends, it's just like it's like no, definitely not. The way I put it a lot of times when I get that argument, it's like no, certainly not. In fact, I hope to be wrong because if I'm wrong, that means then I have a stable job, the economy's doing
Right.
well. I can continue to engage.
Prices are low.
Prices are low. I can continue to engage with all the things that I like to engage with, in my local economy. But
Right. Like I think of it like insurance.
yeah, insurance. Sure.
Like if the economy's good, great. I'll be missing out on some gains, but like I'm not really worried overall because the economy's good. Whereas if the economy's bad, there's much higher chance of being unemployed. I would much rather be earning income than when the market's going up.
Right. I want to talk about the short volatility trade. We could speak to like the base level of what's.
Well, just I would say at a very basic level, volatility has been tremendously low the past 10 years. And so a lot of people have been I listened to a podcast by this guy Christopher Cole, if you want to check him out. And he talked about the reason volatility like this is so dangerous for so many people. Because if you're just, if you just bought the S&P, right, the index, you just went long stock market, that's not a dangerous thing to do. Like sometimes it goes down a lot and you'll lose some money, but like overall it's a pretty harmless choice, It's not that dangerous. However, what a lot of people have done is pension funds, for example, they'll need certain returns to remain funded, right? So they'll build their pension fund with the expectation of getting like 7% return and then that will ensure that they can meet all their liabilities, paying out to everyone in the end, right? Okay. So now if you structure your pension fund around this 7% yield and you actually become underfunded without it, well, that forces you to chase yields. And that's where the problem occurs. The way people have been chasing yields is by selling.
So when you say chase yield, that means you're stepping into markets that are riskier for that marginal yield.
Right.
That risk-free kind of,
right.
Or like that low-risk investment into like the stock market, which is generally guaranteed to go up, you can assume like 7%. If you miss that consistently, you have to account for that. And the only way to do that is to step into something more risky then.
Right. So they're taking more risks. And the way they're doing this is using leverage or debt. And so what they're doing is they're selling put options. And what put options are is they're essentially a bet that the market will go down, or you can think of them as insurance against the market going down. So essentially what they're doing is they're selling insurance against a downturn in the economy. So they're relying on stability in the market to increase their yield, to keep their pension fund going. But now, if you think about it in terms of insurance, if you were selling fire insurance in Australia this year, last year, you're going to have a bad time, right? So this is the problem, is until that fire happened, you're probably doing great. You're probably making a lot of money. But when it did happen, you get boned. And so once the market collapses a little bit and you don't have the money to, pay your interest on your loans that you took out to, gamble with, then you have to start selling equity to make, your call, which just drives it further down. It's like, and it becomes a spiral.
Yeah, I just read this. I'm trying to think of where, because I want to credit who I read it from. I'll look it up and post it in the show notes. But it's like you go to someone's house and they have a tub of extremely flammable byproduct from like a nuclear power plant or whatever. It's extremely toxic, extremely volatile, like tub in their bedroom. And you walk in there and you say, "What are you doing with that in here?" They say, "Oh, it's the nuclear power plant down the road. They pay me a lot of money per year to keep this in my bedroom." And you say, "Don't you know that's dangerous? Like, just a spark could set that off and set this whole town on fire." And you say, "Well, it hasn't in the 5 years that I've held it in this bedroom, so it's actually a good deal. And without it, I wouldn't be able to pay for this mortgage." That's just like dude,
that's a great example.
It's just a depiction of these. So, like I said, these institutions have to step into the market for greater risk to meet their yield obligations, and if they're able to do that with no recourse, with no negative consequences, it may start to seem like there aren't any consequences. It may seem like what they're doing is actually profitable because they're smart. Or I don't know. I don't want to attribute any kind of. It's really not a shortcoming on people. I don't think it's just human nature. I think is more to blame. It's just like you're doing something that yields a good return. We're not really geared to think of the long term when we're making such a profit in the short term. So these funds, these institutions are able to do something that's making them money, and they're just willing to overlook the long-term risk. They're willing to write off the long-term risk in order to keep what's going for them. Keep going.
I think it's just greed, and I don't think of greed as a pure negative. So I'm not one of those people who thinks like, oh, greed, it's the source of all our problems. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with that. I think greed leads people to, like, a lot of people became doctors for greedy reasons because it used to pay a lot. It's actually not that great of a job anymore. But a long time ago, a lot of people became doctors because they were greedy. But am I going to be upset about that? No. Right. It's a great thing that they did become doctors. But sometimes greed does lead us astray. Like, I think it's the chasing that 7% was the greedy thing. Like, they basically they constructed an entire portfolio hinging on this growth assumption, and that was the incredibly greedy thing to do, is to just factor in 7% growth or whatever it may be. That's a common one, but just to make that the hinge, or that's not the right word, but like the cornerstone of your entire portfolio, where it basically has to stockpile risk on it if it can't achieve that, is like that was a greedy thing to do.
The fulcrum on which you lever.
Right. Fulcrum's a good point. A good way to phrase it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could definitely say everybody should do more to think about. Should do more.
Do more. Yo, get off this show right now.
I'm gonna try to rephrase it. No, but I mean, we can never say to people, don't think about your wider influence, your wider reach, because that's a good society is one where everyone trusts each other and thinks about each other, in a way that, in a way that you're not screwing each other. Like, if you're just like out to screw someone else, society is always worse off if everyone's trying to screw someone else. But that's not to say
Right.
that when people act in their own interest, they're necessarily trying to screw other people. There can just be
Right.
floating risks that people aren't accounting for, that when they're thinking in their self-interest, they're not actually understanding that there's a larger societal risk. And I actually was reading
Right.
this statistic today, which made me think of this exact point. And it was that there's like 200 CEOs of like major companies in the last like quarter that have exited their position, that have left their company.
Really.
And I was thinking, like, it could be, there could be just nothing there. It could be no reason for that. It could just be a coincidence. But it
Hmm.
could also be like these CEOs know their company. They know how profitable they are. They know,
Right. And they just don't believe in it.
uh, they don't believe.
Or were you going somewhere else with
Well,
that?
well, yeah. So I was just going. They know their company and they know the valuation of their company, and so they're like, I'm benefiting
Right.
so much from these lofty valuations that the stock market is bidding up and gifting me. I'm not going to say no to that. I'm not going to say no to stock
Right.
options and bonuses every year,
Right.
probably for the last 10 years.
Right.
They're not going to say like, oh, don't give me that. Don't, like, this company I'm running is not worth anything. They're going to say, I'll keep
Right.
doing, as long as I'm getting paid, as long as I'm getting these
Right.
massive bonuses, I'm going to keep doing. And then when the tide starts turning, it's very easy to say, okay, I'll forego the next bonus to get out now, to liquidate whatever I can.
Right.
So I think that a massive uptick in CEOs could possibly be an indication that any kind of realization of that true valuations of those true valuations of their
Mhm.
companies, they could just be like, yeah, I'm not going to stick around to see that. I got the upside. Why would I stick around? Kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's like, if you're the head of a company, you probably have the best idea of anyone, like what the true value of a share of your
Hmm.
company is worth. And so if you're all selling, it's really not a good
Yeah.
indicator. We didn't even talk about coronavirus. We only mentioned it.
A lot of what I hear people tell me is, or what I read is, it's no worse than the flu. It's no worse than like the
Right.
the your run of the mill flu that people get every year kills tens of thousands per year. So how can this, which has only killed
Mhm.
2,000 so far, 3,000 maybe, actually probably more than 3,000. How can this be worse than the flu, which is racked up way more than that in body count?
Yeah, I would say that's a very bad take, and there's good reason for that. And so you can't look at the flu like car accidents, right? You can't compare one year's numbers to another year's numbers and just be like, oh, it's only like 20% more. What's the big deal? Like, that would be true for car accidents. Even if car accidents were double a year, that would be pretty alarming. But again, this is like not a big deal in terms of uh, differences. And the reason for this is because that follows what's called a normal distribution, right? And in normal distributions, the further you get away from the mean, the numbers don't grow exponentially, they grow linearly. Okay? But viruses are not normal distributions, okay? A lot of the cases are going to have, flu-like numbers, seasonal flu-like numbers, and then a very small number of them are going to have astronomically high numbers. Okay? Because viruses are not linear, they don't grow linearly, they grow exponentially. And so very rarely you're going to have hundreds of millions of cases, okay? And things like that. And so we don't know if this is one of them. But my point is, you essentially have to prepare for the worst case scenario, right? And the worst case scenario for viruses is not double the seasonal flu. It's 100 times the seasonal flu, 1,000 times the seasonal flu. This is because these are not normal probability distributions. That's the key difference. So the people who go, oh, like, it's only slightly more than the seasonal flu, what's the big deal? They're thinking in normal distribution terms. They're thinking in linear terms. This is a non-linear problem. They have to get out of that mindset. And so that to me is a very bad take. I don't think this is a reason to panic, but you have to consider the probabilities. And there's a non-zero probability, or not just non-zero, but a decent probability that this could shut down a lot of major economies to a large degree. And so like that's big ramifications. That's big, cost consequences.
So I think I actually think I get what you're saying. Well, I think I know what you're saying. But let me just see if I can rephrase it and tell me if this is like accurate, if you think. So if there was like if there was 1 year that people were driving and there was 100,000 killed in car accidents, and the next year there was 200,000 killed in car accidents, and the next year was 50,000, next year was 250,000, right? So it's like kind of maintaining around, or actually that's about it. Let me start over. So 1 year it's 100,000, next year it's 101,000, next year it's 99,000, next year it's 100,000,
right?
And then 1 year it's 100, and then 1 year it's like 200,000, but then next year it's like 100,000. It's like it's like that year with 200,000 deaths of car accidents. It's like that was really bad, but it wasn't because like that's just like in a normal distribution. Sometimes it deviates from the mean, but those times are few and far between. Like most of the time, it stays close to the center of the normal distribution, and sometimes you'll get times outside. Well, if people are driving cars and you're sticking around a normal distribution, and then 1 year someone invents a personal jetpack, right? And the first year there's 300,000 deaths. You can't say that. How would that compare?
I mean, I think that's not a good analogy either, though, because again, I think that's still a normal distribution.
It's just different.
Like you have to change the dynamics of the problem. Is like essentially, like the probability of car accidents. Or let's phrase it another way, right? So like that $200,000 or that 200,000 death accident that year, okay? Let's say that was two or three standard deviations from let's call it three standard deviations from the mean. That's a low probability event. But it's still not that bad, right? It's only like double, okay? The point is, for that same level of probability, 3 standard deviations away. But now with viruses, a long-tailed distribution, a non-normal distribution, that same probability is going to yield 100 million deaths instead of like, you know what I'm saying? So like, you can't look at it like it's a normal distribution because it's not. So it's like when you look at the outliers of a normal distribution, they're still pretty close in value to the mean. Outliers in a long-tailed distribution are tremendously far from the mean. They're much different from the mean.
Yeah, because the normal distribution, like 68% of all data will return within one standard deviation either way, and like 95% will return within 2 standard deviations either way. 99. I think I have those numbers close. But you're saying epidemiology or epistemology or whatever it's called.
I think it's epidemiology.
It's very just the nature of spreading something from human to human. It's a different characterization of the distribution. It's not a normal distribution.
Right. Because like car accidents, what would cause car accidents to go up more one year than another. It's like it's linear differences. There's no feedback loops there, right? Like more car accidents don't make more car accidents, right? They don't. There's nothing in there inherently that's gonna like radically drive those numbers up one way or the other, and that's why you get a normal distribution. But with viruses, the more people that get it, the even more people that get it. And so it's like there's a feedback loop. And so that's why you don't get normal distributions. You get other types of distributions in these cases.
I was off with the different scenarios for transportation. I think a better analogy would be like if you had a social network that you're trying to make popular. You could, maybe there was 100 social networks in 2000 that tried to launch, and a couple of them did well. They had 2,000 to 50,000 users, and most of them didn't do very well. They had 10 to 100 users or whatever. But the two or three that actually launched, Twitter, the Facebook, they launched not because they were better per se, but every marginal user that was added to their platform made it more valuable as a platform. So every marginal user to Facebook made someone who's thinking about getting a Facebook say, oh, well, 95% of my friends are on Facebook as opposed to only 10 or 5 or 3% on any other platform. So it's actually like that network effect creates outliers in the social network choosing which one succeeds, which is just like the virus.
Right. Exactly. That's a great analogy. It's like there's a very few number of social networks with a lot of users. So like the probability of your social network, having a lot of users is low, but then, every once in a while, one's going to make it and have a ton of users. And so you can't compare, like and you'd be just as stupid, right? If you were an early investor or you had the opportunity to be an early investor in Instagram, for example, and you go, it only has twice as many users as like, I don't know, something no one uses, but it's only got a few thousand more users. If you're thinking in those terms, you're thinking in the wrong terms. You have to be thinking about the problem differently. That's not a correct way of looking at the problem. Like I don't know the correct way to analysis, but that line of thinking will lead you astray. I know that much for a fact. I don't know how you should look at them. If I did, I'd be rich. But well,
I think
my point is
that the way to look at it is like the growth rate. Is it growing? How long is it growing exponentially, and how many?
Maybe. I don't know if that would even work in itself, but it could. But the point is, like, if you were trying to compare Instagram to others by the numbers at the time, it would be like trying to compare coronavirus to the other flus. It's the same type of thing. So it's like, yes, most of the time you'll be right. But when you're wrong, you're really wrong.
Which goes back to this.
You're not just kind of wrong. You're really wrong.
We already talked about that on this podcast of in a completely different framework of those institutions that aren't accounting for the unlikely drastic outcome.
Right. That's another example of a non-normal distribution. They've basically exposed their portfolio to tail risk.
Yeah, so people that compare different viral outbreaks to existing viral outbreaks are doing more, assuming, where am I going? Just are doing more acting like institutional investors. They're not fully accounting for tail risk. Tail risk is the word. That's the common theme. Tail risk.
That's the common term. Tail risk, yeah. of the
So
day.
do less.
Yeah, it shows up in a lot of places because most things we encounter in life are normal distributions, and so we think
Yeah.
in those terms very often. Like we don't necessarily think about normal distributions, but it is essentially the mental model we're using when we think about a lot of things.
Right, it is. Yeah, I'd like to think of a good example of that. It's probably, well,
Let's try this example, right? Like when you're shopping around for an apartment, okay? You don't, most of the places you look at are going to be around the same price. It's not like if you spend enough time, eventually you'll find one that's like $0 a month in that area. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's not, it's not in your interest to wait a long time for like that outlier price because they don't exist.
I gotcha.
They're just too low probability.
good.
You know what I'm saying?
That's pretty good. Yeah, so if you find one that's like good enough and any kind of significantly below mean, you take that one.
Right.
Yeah.
Just take it. Right. Exactly. But if they had a long tail, it actually would be worth it to wait for that time. But they don't happen. They don't exist.
Right. So you taking an apartment and you executing on a contract to live in an apartment, you're probably operating under a normal distribution mentality of apartments.
Exactly.
Okay. Cool. Well, we'll see you next time. Keep doing less. Thanks for listening. Now go do something productive.
No, don't do that.
Do less.
Do less.